It's been almost a month since I officially launched my new business, Resewn Textiles. So I thought it was about time that we did a Q&A type video where you can get to know me and the business a little bit more. This is going to be quite a chatty video. Hopefully I won't waffle on too much, but grab yourself a cup of tea like I have. I've gone for a nice herbal peppermint today. It's still far too hot for me to drink. But yes, grab a cup of tea and a snack and we'll get going. Hi, welcome back and welcome if you're new here. My name is Zoe and today I'm going to be going through some questions that I've received from people on my social media and from friends and family. So hopefully I get to your question if you asked one. If you do think of any questions while I'm talking and I haven't answered it, please pop it in the comments. I'm going to go through every single one and answer them anyway. I've got them all here on my iPad. So I'm just going to go through them one by one. I haven't thought of answers in advance. I'm just going to read the question and think of what comes to mind. I thought that was the easiest and most genuine thing to do. Hopefully I answer your questions well. If you want me to elaborate, obviously ask me in the comments again. So the first question is, how did you learn to sew and upcycle? Now, I think I touched on this slightly in my very first video on YouTube. I say very first, it was only a few months ago, but I spoke a bit about my background and history. But in terms of how I actually learned to sew, it's very much self-taught with a couple of lessons. So I was really nervous to actually start sewing. I got a machine, but I wasn't really sure what to do. I was quite nervous about how things worked and like all the mechanisms on my machine. And I'm very lucky to have a sewing hub near my house. So it's basically this community centre where this lady runs sewing classes and you can go along to beginners classes and she'll teach you how to sew basic things. And I went along to one of those classes. So I only went to 2 classes total just because they were quite expensive. And so the first class, they taught you how to make a nice mini tote bag. This is the tote bag. So this is the first thing I ever sewed, and I use it to collect all my like threads and bits and pieces when I'm sewing. So it's come in quite handy actually, but it taught me a lot. It taught me about how to sew in a straight line. It taught me how to do a lining, how to do box corners, and how to press the handles. It was a really good first project. And the class is only about an hour long, so, you know, I didn't finish it all in that class. I took it home and then continued it on my machine. It was a really good first opportunity, right? So I learned through that course how to do those basic techniques, but then I continued with YouTube. So the next thing I made was this. So that tote bag, they gave you all the materials in the class and all those materials are donated. And I didn't have a lot of money to spend on sewing classes and materials, hence why I only went to 2 classes. And in the second class, we made an apron. Then I decided I would continue learning at home because I didn't want to spend that money. So I used YouTube and I made this bag. And this was the second thing I ever made. And I knew I needed materials to try out. And we have a scrap store nearby. Because I didn't want to buy like new fabrics. I've never gone out and bought new fabrics. I wanted to use secondhand and old materials. So I went to our local scrap store and picked up this nice like plain material, and then they had boxes of scraps. And one of the scraps had this pattern here. And you can see where this is going. I kind of pieced all these different fabrics together. This inside here was a bed sheet. And so I started to piece together bits to make this. And I followed Sydney Graham, I think that's her name, her tutorial on how to make a tote bag, and it's a really good tutorial. I would recommend following her videos. She's really beginner friendly and she's got some free courses like this bag. So I followed her YouTube series about how to sew, and that gave me the confidence to try new things. And I started with bags, but then I thought I am just going to jump into something other than a bag. So I thought I'm going to go straight to making trousers. That was quite ambitious of me because I'd only ever made 2 bags and an apron. And of course, again, I didn't have any other materials other than bed sheets. So I grabbed a bed sheet and my friend had a pattern and it was an indie pattern. And I can't remember what it was called, but if I remember it, I will put it in here. So we followed that pattern and we made these trousers and I loved them. I had my friend with me to kind of help. She'd been sewing for a few years, so she was kind of like guiding and like telling me bits. But to be honest, the pattern instructions for indie patterns are so good that I don't think I would have needed much assistance because they go through everything step by step in a lot of detail with pictures, and this person had a video as well showing you how to make it. So yeah, I learned through mainly YouTube, self-taught, and I have got some books now. I've invested in some books since starting this business, but I don't use them as much. I think I prefer the visual YouTube. Obviously, having somebody teach you is way better, but for the sake of being on a budget, using YouTube was the main way I learned how to sew. And in terms of learning how to upcycle, it just happened naturally. It was just, I only have limited materials, and I thought, if I don't want to spend money, I'll use bed sheets. And then I looked to my wardrobe and realised I have things I just don't wear, or things that just don't fit me anymore. And I decided to make, there's a top that I made out of a dress. And I just thought, right, there's enough material here to make the front of the top. There's enough here. I actually reused the sleeves on the dress. I didn't change them at all. And it was just piecing things together with what I've got. So that's how I learned that. Okay, question 2. What's been the funnest part of starting your business? This is quite a nice question. I'd say there's been a lot of fun parts about starting this business, but I think the funnest has been the creativity that I get to use. So like I said about the upcycling, it was figuring out what material from where I need to put to make something else, but then, you know, fitting pattern pieces to the material that you've got, but then also drafting the pattern pieces in the first place. Because I'm running a business, a lot of patterns are for personal use only, and they specifically say not for commercial use. So you can't just, the trousers I made, I wouldn't be able to use that pattern and then sell the trousers. So because I don't want to accidentally sell somebody else's design, I want to make sure that I'm making all my own designs. So I think that is the funnest part, is thinking, okay, where can I place things to make stuff, and how would I actually make that? How would I put it together? Like when I made the bag, I have a video where I transformed some fabric scraps into a bag for a friend, and just thinking through like, okay, so I want the shape of the bag to be like this, which means I'm going to have a pattern piece like that, but then you need to figure out, okay, when it's joined together, you need to add in the seam allowance. And I think it's that challenge and that trying to piece things together, that's the funnest part. It's challenging, but I think that's why it's fun. Okay, question 3, what motivated you to start this business? In that very first video that I mentioned, I do talk about my history of how this business came to be, but the actual motivation is quite interesting. I don't know whether there's one particular thing, but when I first started to learn how to sew, it wasn't with the idea of I'm going to make a business. It was more, I want to make stuff for myself. I've gone through a lot of clothes in my life, I'm sure we all have, but I've gone through lots of times where I thought, no, that style doesn't suit me anymore, I'm going to completely redo my wardrobe, and a lot of figuring out what I wanted and then being disappointed when things didn't fit me properly, and you're not having the money to revamp my wardrobe and things like that. So I wanted to make stuff for myself. I knew I wanted to design items that I knew I would wear and feel confident in. So the initial motivation to sew was me feeling confident in myself and what I'm wearing. And then when I started sewing, I realised this is really fun. And then when I started to make things out of patterns, I thought, how did they do that? And then it's that motivation to, I want to learn how to make my own patterns and make my own stuff. From there, it was getting to know lots of other people who sew, and then being part of the sewing community on Instagram and TikTok and seeing exactly what people do with fabrics. And then starting to learn that, you know, not everybody's like me. They don't always source their materials from scrap stores and charity shops and the wardrobe. They tend to buy fabric in meters and yards and big bulks of fabric, right? And then they will take those big bits of fabric and transform them into clothes. And I thought, oh, okay, so people are using new fabric. I realized that using existing fabric was cheaper. I started to do more research into the impact of, you know, fast fashion and clothes, and then realized buying new fabric is essentially like buying new clothes, although there isn't that as much of that human aspect, but the environmental aspect, you're still growing materials, dyeing them, and eventually those materials might get thrown away or put on landfill anyway, and it's still got that environmental impact. So I thought, okay, I am going to commit to only ever using existing materials. And so I thought, okay, I have this, this passion, this skill that I've learned to sew for myself, and I'm helping myself feel more confident in what I'm wearing. And so could I help other people become more confident in what they're wearing, but also at the same time help the environment? So that was where the motivation came from. It was, I know I really enjoy this hobby. I know that I like sewing, and I know that I could use that to help the environment and help people and sort of rebel against fast fashion a little bit. Yeah, I think that was the biggest motivation, using my skills hopefully for good and with the goal of saving as many textiles from landfill as possible. I might explain this a bit better in the first video, so if you are interested, please go and watch that video. But if I haven't described it very well, let me know in the comments and I'll elaborate a bit more. Question 4, what's been your favourite piece so far? In terms of what I've made so far for the business, I would have to say the bag that I made for my friend Hannah. So I've got a video here that you can go and watch, but I loved that. I want a bag like that. She kind of based the bag off of the one I have. But then obviously I've redesigned it and I really like it, and then I don't have enough material to make myself one. So, but it was really fun and it turned out really well and she was really happy with it. I think that's my favourite so far, but I've enjoyed all the projects I've had. So yeah, I think that was quite a tough question. Question 5 is very similar. What has been your most challenging project so far? I think the most challenging one is one I haven't started yet. So they didn't specify completed projects. So this is an ongoing project that I've started, but I haven't filmed it yet for YouTube, so you won't have seen it. So I have a friend who has a bed sheet. It's a really gorgeous bed sheet, and she wants it transformed into a jumpsuit. And the reason this is so challenging is because I've been spending a few nights researching, looking at inspiration on YouTube, in books, Pinterest, to try and figure out, we've come up with a design. Obviously, like I said, I don't want to be selling somebody else's pattern or design, so I'm making it from scratch. So that's the challenging part. So I know what I want it to look like. I have a design on paper, well, on my iPad. It's just that figuring out, how do I make the pattern pieces, 2D pattern pieces, make this 3D shape that we have designed. And I know exactly how I want it to look. It's just I've been spending a lot of time being a bit meticulous about, okay, I know I want this to go together in this way, so how would I piece these things together? I've got all her measurements, but how do I know, how to draw the bodice bit and the legs? So I'm going to make that jumpsuit for myself out of a different bedsheet first as like an example. I think the sewing community call this like a toil? Let me know how you say that. Essentially, I'm going to make myself that jumpsuit using my measurements to test out this pattern that I'm coming up with, and then I'm going to make her one when I know that it fits me well, but then I'll just obviously translate it to her measurements. It's that challenge of, how do I draw a flat pattern piece and make darts in the right places and curves in the right places that it will all fit together to make this nice 3D shape. So that, despite the fact that I haven't finished it and you haven't seen any of it, it's my most challenging project so far, and it might be a while before I have this out on YouTube. As I said, I'm making a version for myself, then a version for her, and it is very challenging. Question 6, can you upcycle anything? Are there any materials that friends can give you to repurpose? I think the answer is mostly. So in terms of can you upcycle anything, it depends, I think. In terms of clothes, absolutely, because no matter how big the item is, you might have a dress or maybe a little skirt or even underwear, as long as it's clean. Any size of fabric can be repurposed. So if you think of a massive dress, I could cut that up into a top like I did for myself, or you could keep the dress shape as is, but just add differences to it. You could add like a cinched waist or change the neckline or add different sleeves. But if you're looking at smaller items, say you've got underwear or some socks or something, they can still be repurposed. I've seen people use socks to make like little jewellery bags. You can cut up the underwear and you could make it into small like squares, and then you can take those small squares and you could make a patchwork project. I made some patchwork dungarees for myself. So you just need some small items and you can make them into any design you want. Basically like quilters do when they make big quilts. You can use all these little shapes and patch them together. If the item is really small, I can't even think of like a size smaller than underwear. But if it's like, maybe like children's clothes and they're really small, if they're too small to make into anything patchwork, you could cut them up into really little scraps and then you use those scraps to stuff other things. So I think a really good project that I really want to try and put it on the store at some point is making like these memory bears or like animals. So what you would do is you would get loads of bits of different pieces of clothing, you'd patchwork them together into the shape of the animal, make the 3D animal, and then stuff it with tiny little scraps. So that way you're using everything. So yes, you can upcycle any piece of material like textiles. And I also should mention that it's not just clothing, it's things like curtains, bedding, tablecloths. They can all be used, anything that's like a fabric material. And so in terms of any materials that friends can give you to repurpose, absolutely. I bought curtains for my flat, but I have a single window and curtains come in a pair. I had one curtain that wasn't being used, so my mum made that into pillows for me. So then I have matching pillows in my living room that match my curtains. Even things like that, or maybe you've got a tablecloth that you don't use anymore, or you've got bedding that's gotten a bit older and you just don't use it, it was sat in the back of your airing cupboard. Or like my friend, she had a bed sheet that had a stain on it from nail varnish. And so what you can do is you could use the rest of the material, but then that bit with the stain, cut it into little pieces, use it as stuffing. There are a few things that I personally won't work with, and that's any animal derived products, so your leather, wool or silk. And that's just a personal preference on my part that I decided before starting this business. Otherwise, yes, any materials are really good, and I would love to work with any donations that you have or any things that you would like me to repurpose. Very happy to always take a look, see what I think and see what we can do with them. Okay, question 7. Do you take orders that come with specific requests to imitate something the person has seen elsewhere, or do you do your own designs only? So that's an interesting question, because sort of say like yes and no. Obviously I'm never going to imitate something directly because that would not be very nice to the original person that created that item, because that will basically be me copying them. I always make sure to design my own thing, and when it's a custom upcycling order, working with them to design that specific thing that they want to meet their needs and everything. So yeah, I always make sure that we design it together, we draw it on the iPad, and then I will make the pattern from there. If the final item ends up looking quite similar to something else, I've definitely not copied. I think the beauty of this business is in the fact that everything is unique and one of a kind, and the fact that I'm designing the items with the person and making things with them in mind. I think there's something quite nice about them being my own designs, because it means that these items are completely unique and one of a kind, and you're not going to buy them elsewhere. They've been designed from scratch with me and maybe a customer together. And for the things that I've put on the shop, things like scrunchies and makeup bags, everyone's making those kind of things. So there are some items where it's going to look like other people's, it's just the nature of the product. But when it comes to more detailed and complicated items like bags and clothing, then yes, it is my own design, but the customer might come to me with I've seen this thing, I really like it, I'd like something similar for myself. And then we would have a discussion about what that would look like, and also what I can do to maybe modify it a little bit so it's not an exact copy, or talking about maybe they want something similar but actually they wanted the waist to be elasticated, or they wanted adjustable straps and things like that. So yeah, I think in short, yes, I definitely take specific requests for orders, absolutely. In terms of like the lady that came to me about the bed sheet turning it into a jumpsuit, she had a specific request. She knew she wanted a jumpsuit, she knew she wanted it made out of that bedding, and she wanted certain leg size, leg length, she wanted straps that are adjustable. So it's, yes, they can come to me with specific things, and then we work together, and for me to say, oh, actually, I know you want it this way, but just considering, you know, she mentioned, what if I put on or lose weight in the future? Okay, maybe we'll make this into more of an adjustable jumpsuit, or maybe somebody comes to me with something that's actually really complicated, and I help to figure out, actually, if we do it this way, it'll be simpler, and then obviously will cost less for the final thing. So any upcycling orders that I do are always in collaboration with the person that's asked, and then we work together on design, and then I will make a quote from that. Custom orders are greatly appreciated, and I love working with people on these because we'll sit down and we'll think about what are your requirements, what you need, what you like. They can come to me with a mood board, they can come to me with certain requests, and then we'll work together to see, okay, what's feasible with the material. And that's one of the great challenges, but also fun bits about this. I obviously want to make sure that whatever the person wants, they're going to wear and use and love, because then that's more sustainable because they're going to wear it a lot, right? I don't want something that's just going to sit back in the back of their wardrobe and then they're going to come to me in a year and be like, okay, I never wore this, can we do something else with it? So yes, absolutely to specific requests. So if you did have something in mind, the person that asked this question, obviously let me know, reach out, we'll have a chat, absolutely fine. Question 8, do you do kids' clothes? I hadn't considered doing children's clothes. I think because my experience is with adults' clothes, so I've learned through using indie patterns for adult females. I know how the patterns kind of work, and I have experience with how to design an item of clothing for a woman. But in terms of children, obviously when you're making clothes for an adult, you can measure them properly. So I'm able to, if someone comes to me with a custom order for themselves, I will take their measurements and we'll do like their waist, their hips, their bust, their length of their leg, their torso. But with a child, it's very different, and children grow so quickly. So I think if someone came to me and wanted some children's clothes, I would be absolutely open to the idea. I'd have to be upfront and say, I've never made anything for a child. I've only ever made adults' clothes. And I know that with children, you need to make sure that, because I've made crocheted items for children, and I know to use specific material that's soft on their skin and isn't going to agitate them, making sure there's no loose threads, there's no like hard buttons or clasps. So using things like Velcro and ties and French seams. So I understand the basic concepts, but in terms of knowing if it will fit the child, I think what I would end up doing would be asking them to provide me with some clothing they already have for the child, and then I can use that as a basis. So measuring the clothing rather than measuring the child. So it would end up being like, if you wanted some trousers for a child, if you gave me a nice fitting pair of trousers, I could then draw around them as a template and then design from that, and I would get an idea of the waist that fits them, the leg width and stuff like that. So yeah, I could do children's clothes. Like the beauty of having a business where the main part of it is the upcycling service means that if you have something that you want to be upcycled into something else, whatever that something else is, we can have a chat about it, whether that's an item of clothing for you or your partner or your children or an accessory. Absolutely, we can have a chat and then we can go from there. So I'm open to it, don't have any experience with it, but in theory, yes. Obviously, I think those kind of things would be on a case-by-case kind of basis. I made a conscious decision not to put clothes on my shop just because I know that everybody's a different size, and I don't want to be putting items of clothing on the store that only fit one person, and then somebody else goes, but I really like that fabric, but that doesn't fit me, and obviously I'm limited in the amount of fabric that I have because it's all upcycled. So once it's gone, it's gone. And I don't want that disappointment in people, or maybe the person that really likes it isn't the right size and that item doesn't end up selling because the person that is that size doesn't like those colours or that design. So I made the decision to put accessories on the shop, and then I can take those things to markets. But then when I am at a market, I'm going to take clothes that I've made for myself just as ideas for people, so that when they come to me with an upcycling request and go, look, I've got this item, I've got this tablecloth, for example, I don't know what to do with it, but I want to make it into something else. I can go, hey, so actually I made a skirt out of a tablecloth and this is what it looked like. And then they can go, oh, okay, I like that, but actually I think I'd like it shorter than that. So it's something to start a conversation rather than to be sold to somebody, if that makes sense. So doing like a child's item of clothing would be on a like request base. So I would do something for someone that they requested it, but it's not something that I would actively go and make like a load of children's trousers or dresses or something to put on my shop. Okay, so I've got one more question, and hopefully I haven't waffled on too much because I don't want this video to be extra long. So question 9 is, what is your fave fabric to work with? Now, I do have a preference because there are some fabrics that are just generally harder to use than others. And when I'm doing alterations for people, I always bear that in mind, and I'll tell them the price will be a bit higher for certain materials because they just are more difficult to work with, which means it takes more time and might need specialist needles and might need some hand sewing, that kind of thing. So I don't like working with slippery materials because I've got a very small table right now, and I don't like that they just fall off. It's possible to work with them, it's just it takes so much longer, and then you get to the point where you're like, stop moving. And I don't mind working with jeans, but I have this fear of the needle breaking every time I go into a thick section, and then I'm trying to be really slow. So my fave fabric would have to be a nice, gentle cotton. Maybe that's because it's the kind of fabric that's suggested to beginners. And there's a reason it's suggested to beginners. It doesn't have any stretch to it, it's lightweight, you use a regular needle, and it just glides through the sewing machine. You don't get issues with any tension or bobbling usually, and it's just nice. So I would say a nice, like, something like this. So this shirt, if someone came to me and said, I want to upcycle this shirt, and I'm pretty sure this is a cotton shirt, yes, absolutely. Or that, or linen. Linen's also quite nice, but it can be a bit heavier, and I also find it really hard to find linen. In terms of like finding clothes or materials, it's mostly cotton that I find. So it's a good job I like cotton. But yes, I think these kind of simpler materials that don't stretch are really nice. The only thing that's difficult with them is if someone wants something form-fitting, cotton doesn't stretch, so you have to make sure, like with this bedsheet I'm using to make a jumpsuit, she wants it more of a fitted top. So then it's figuring out where do I need to place the darts and things to curve around the right areas on the body. And if with a t-shirt material, it would just fit. I think there are positives and negatives to every kind of material. For example, with knit fabrics, they don't fray, so you don't need to finish the edges, which means less thread. But I have an overlocker, which makes using cotton and stuff a lot easier because you just run it through the overlocker. Long story short, cotton. Oh, that's gone cold. I've definitely spoken for too long. I think that's all the questions I had. If I missed your question, I'm so sorry. Just let me know and I will answer it in the comments. But yeah, thank you so much for sending those in. I put a request out on social media just wondering what people were going to say, and I'm really glad I got these questions. And I'm just really grateful for all the support for this business. I only officially launched this business about a month ago, so to have this support already, I'm so grateful and thank you. So hopefully these questions helped you to get to know me and the business a bit more. If you do, like I said, if you have any other questions, pop them in the comments, I will answer them. And maybe like in the future, we'll do more Q&As because I think this is quite a good opportunity for, especially for new people, to come and see exactly what happens with my business and how I run it and who I am. I do have a social post on Instagram that talks a bit more about me and who I am. I think it says like, let's get to know each other or something like that. So if you want to know a bit more about me, there are those bits there. And also that first video that I made for YouTube has a bit more background. So I will link that at the end of this video if you'd like to go and watch that. I'm going to leave that there just because if I waffled on anymore, this video will be super long. Yes, thank you for being here and thank you for watching. I hope this was informative and you enjoyed it and you learned a lot. If you did reach the end of this video, let's use the question mark emoji just because the theme of the day has been Q&A. So leave me a question mark emoji. If you did enjoy this video, please give me a like, a thumbs up, a comment, or hype it if you're able to. Readers help my new channel. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. I'll be doing some more videos. Like I said, maybe another Q&A video in the future. But I'll be doing more vlogs, more sewing content, transformation stories, alterations, repairs. So yes, there's lots to look forward to, hopefully. And just thank you so much for being here. And hopefully I will see you in the next one.